This sauce tastes like dirty dishwater, just like you, Grace. Head chef Brad Sterling poured scalding béarnaise sauce over Grace Winter's wrinkled hands. She didn't flinch or cry out, just kept scrubbing his pan silently. He called her fossil and treated the 62-year-old dishwasher like trash daily. He didn't know the woman he mocked had won 3 James Beard Awards. And tonight, when a Michelin inspector walked in, he'd learn who really owned this kitchen. Before watching, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The kitchen of Le Grand Palais was a battlefield of steam, steel, and constant shouting. At the center of the chaos stood Brad Sterling, 30 years old, and convinced he was God's gift to cuisine. He moved with frantic, aggressive energy, barking orders at his terrified staff like a drill sergeant. Faster! If that soufflé falls, you're fired. I don't care if you have to hold it up with tears. He threw a copper sauté pan across the kitchen toward the dish pit without warning or apology. It landed with a deafening crash, splashing soapy water onto the apron of the woman scrubbing there. Grace Winters was 62, with gray hair tucked under a hairnet and arthritic fingers wrapped around steel wool. For 12 hours every day, she scraped foie gras and truffle oil off plates she could no longer afford. The hot grease from Brad's pan had splattered onto her hands, leaving small red marks on already scarred skin. I need that pan back in 2 minutes, Grandma. Move your ass or I'll find someone with working joints. Grace picked up the pan silently, her movements practiced and economical despite the pain in her fingers. She could smell the burnt butter on the bottom from 15 feet away, even through the kitchen chaos. He's using the heat too high, she thought automatically. He's rushing the caramelization and destroying the flavor. But she said nothing because she was just the dishwasher, invisible in the shadows of someone else's kitchen. She scrubbed the pan with a rhythm born of decades of discipline, muscle memory from another lifetime. Once, she had owned a restaurant that presidents and celebrities flew across the country to visit. Once, she was known as the Queen of New York cuisine, featured on magazine covers and morning shows. But medical bills for her late husband David's cancer had devoured everything she'd built over 40 years. Her restaurant, her brownstone home, her retirement savings, all sacrificed to buy him 6 more precious months. Now, she lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet and ate convenience store sandwiches for dinner. The scent of truffle oil hit her nose suddenly, and the kitchen around her blurred and transformed. For a moment, she wasn't at Le Grand Palais. She was standing in her own restaurant 20 years ago. Opening night, 2004, the dining room packed with New York's elite, waiting for tables they'd booked months ahead. David was alive, healthy, standing beside her in the kitchen wearing his ridiculous Sioux husband apron. "You did it, Gracie," he'd whispered, kissing her temple as tickets poured in from the dining room. "We did it," she'd corrected, squeezing his hand before plating the first course of the evening. The James Beard nomination letter had arrived 3 months later, framed on the wall beside their marriage certificate. She'd won her first award that year, then 2 more over the next decade of relentless excellence. Presidents had eaten at her table. Food critics had written poetry about her cassoulet and bouillabaisse. "Grace, are you asleep? Are you having a senior moment?" Brad's voice snapped her back to reality. The truffle oil smell was gone, replaced by the harsh chemical scent of industrial dish soap. "The pan is ready, chef," Grace said, her voice raspy but calm, extending the spotless copper. "It better be. I don't want your geriatric dust particles contaminating my scallop risotto," Brad spat viciously. He grabbed the pan without thanks and turned back to his station, already screaming at someone else. "You're like a broken emulsion, Grace. Separated, useless, and impossible to fix," he added over his shoulder. The other cooks kept their heads down, pretending not to hear the cruelty that permeated every shift. Elena, a young prep cook from Guatemala, brought a stack of dirty plates to the sink carefully. "I am so sorry, Grace," Elena whispered, her dark eyes filled with genuine sympathy and embarrassment. "He is a pendejo," she added even more quietly, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Brad didn't hear. Grace chuckled, a dry, warm sound like leaves rustling in autumn wind, her first smile of the day. "He is young, Elena. He thinks noise and cruelty are the same thing as talent and leadership, Grace replied. But he is so cruel to you, to all of us, Elena said, handing Grace a glass of water. Grace drank gratefully, her throat dry from the constant heat and steam of the enclosed dish pit area. Cruelty is the weak man's imitation of strength, Misha. He doesn't know any better yet. From the pass, Brad's voice cut through the kitchen noise again, like a knife through butter. Who cut these chives? They look like they were hacked with a lawnmower by a blind person. He held up a handful of herbs and threw them dramatically onto the floor for everyone to see. Elena, did you do this pathetic excuse for chiffonade? He demanded, his face reddening with theatrical anger. Elena froze completely, her face going pale, her hands starting to shake as all eyes turned to her. Yes, chef. I tried to do the chiffonade technique like you showed me yesterday. Her voice trembled. You tried? Trying isn't good enough. You failed. You're absolutely useless, Brad roared at full volume. Get out of my sight. Go scrub pots with Grandma. Maybe you can learn how to be irrelevant together. Elena held back tears and walked to the Dunish pit, with her head down, humiliation burning her cheeks. Grace placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, steadying her before she could start crying openly. Don't cry, Elena, Grace whispered firmly but kindly, squeezing her shoulder once. Why not? I want to be a chef, Grace, but I can't do anything right, Elena sobbed quietly. Tears ruined the seasoning, Mija. And you did everything right, Grace said, looking at the discarded chives. Grace looked at Brad, who was now preening and adjusting his chef's coat in the reflection of the stainless oven door. In her locker, hidden under her extra uniform, Grace kept something she hadn't touched in 3 years. 3 James Beard medals, wrapped in tissue paper, alongside a folded newspaper clipping from her glory days. She thought about them now, about the woman she used to be before medical bills became more important than legacy. Meet me here after close tonight, Grace said suddenly, her voice shifting to something sharp and commanding. I'm going to teach you how to hold a knife the way it was meant to be held. It was 2 a.m. when Grace unlocked the knife case she kept hidden at the bottom of her locker. These weren't the dull, institutional knives provided by the restaurant's corporate purchasing department. This was a custom Japanese steel blade, folded 10,000 times by a master craftsman in Kyoto. David had given it to her for their 20th anniversary, the last gift before the cancer diagnosis. Elena stared at the knife in the dim security lighting, her eyes wide with something approaching reverence. That is the most beautiful knife I have ever seen in my life, Grace. It is an extension of your hand, Elena. You read it with respect, and it will serve you faithfully. As Grace spoke, her entire posture changed dramatically, years falling away from her hunched shoulders. The slump of the dishwasher vanished completely, replaced by the straight spine of a master chef. She stood tall, her chin high, her movement suddenly fluid and precise, like a dancer warming up. Show me how you cut the chives the way Brad taught you, Grace ordered, her voice crisp. Elena picked up a bunch of herbs and began chopping nervously, her cuts uneven and hesitant. Stop, Grace said gently but firmly, staying Elena's hand with a touch. You are fighting the vegetable, trying to force the blade. The knife wants to cut. Let it. Grace took the blade and positioned it carefully, her scarred hands moving with absolute confidence and precision. She began to cut, and the knife became a blur of controlled motion across the cutting board. Tap, 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 tap. The sound was rhythmic, almost musical, like a jazz drummer keeping perfect time without thinking. The chives were reduced to perfect, identical green ribbons in less than 10 seconds of pure skill. Elena's mouth fell completely open, her previous attempt now looking childish by comparison to this mastery. Who are you really, Grace? Elena whispered, looking at the older woman with new eyes. Grace smiled, a sad, nostalgic expression that carried the weight of years and loss and memory. I was someone who loved this job more than anything except my husband, once upon a time. Now, you try again. Guide the blade with your knuckles. Tuck your fingers. Feel the rhythm. For the next 3 weeks, this secret ritual became the most important part of both their lives. While Brad shouted and threw tantrums during the day, Grace taught at night in the silent kitchen. On night 2, Grace taught Elena how to emulsify a vinaigrette by sound, not by sight alone. Close your eyes, Misha. Listen to the whisk against the bowl. Hear when the oil is incorporating? Elena listened, her eyes closed, as the sound changed from liquid to something thicker, more substantial. I hear it. It sounds different now. More. Together? Elena said, opening her eyes excitedly. Exactly. Your ears will tell you what your eyes might miss. Trust all your senses, not just one. On night 7, Grace taught her how to smell when a steak was perfectly medium rare without cutting it. The myoglobin releases a specific scent, 8 exactly 135 degrees. Smell that? Elena leaned over the pan, inhaling deeply, committing the aroma to memory like studying for an exam. On night 14, Grace showed her how to mount a beurre blanc without breaking the emulsion. Cold butter, small pieces, constant motion. You're building a suspension, not just melting fat into liquid. On night 21, Grace stirred a stock pot slowly, while Elena watched every movement with intensity. Cooking is not about ego, Elena, Grace said quietly, skimming the surface with practiced economy. It is about love, about respect. You are feeding someone's soul, not just filling their stomach. Brad cooks for applause, for Instagram posts and magazine reviews, Elena observed, understanding dawning. And that is why his food has no heart, no memory. It's technically correct, but emotionally empty. One afternoon during family meal, Brad stormed into the break room where the staff was eating. He saw Elena eating a small empanada she had, made for herself from leftover ingredients. What does that smell? It smells like... What is that? Brad asked, wrinkling his nose dramatically. It's just my lunch, chef. Beef empanada with cumin and paprika, Elena said, shrinking in her chair. It smells like cheap street food from a cart. Throw it out immediately, Brad ordered without tasting it. It's disturbing the customers, he lied blatantly. The kitchen was completely sealed from the dining room. Elena stood up to obey, shame and hurt burning her cheeks as the other cooks watched in silence. Grace stepped forward calmly and took the empanada directly from Elena's hand before she could throw it away. She took a deliberate bite, chewing slowly while Brad watched in complete disgust and growing confusion. The pastry is flaky and properly laminated. The cumin is toasted perfectly, not burned, Grace announced clearly. This is the best thing cooked in this kitchen all week, maybe all month, she declared to the room. The other cooks gasped audibly, shocked. Nobody ever spoke back to Brad, not if they wanted to keep working. Brad's face turned an unhealthy shade of purple, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple with rage. You senile old hag, he hissed venomously, stepping closer to her in what might have been intimidation. Get back to the sink before I fire both of you and make you both homeless. Grace finished the empanada calmly, wiped her mouth with a paper napkin, and met his eyes directly. The sink is waiting, chef. But taste is something you can't wash off, no matter how hard you scrub. She walked away with her head high, leaving Brad fuming and confused, and feeling something unfamiliar. Doubt. He didn't know it yet, but the war had just begun between them across a battlefield of cuisine. And he was fighting an enemy he couldn't even see, someone far more dangerous than he could imagine. Friday night arrived with the weight of destiny, the busiest service of the entire year at Le Grand Palais. The ticket printer was spitting out orders like a machine gun, the sound relentless and anxiety-inducing for everyone. Order in, 3 lobster, 2 Wellington, 1 vegetarian tasting, table 6 needs it in 12 minutes, Brad shouted. Suddenly, the restaurant manager, Pierre, burst through the swinging kitchen doors like a man fleeing a fire. His face was white as fresh mozzarella, sweating profusely, his normally perfect hair disheveled and wild. Brad, stop everything immediately. Everyone stop, Pierre whispered urgently, his French accent thickening with panic. What? I'm drowning in tickets here, Pierre. We're in the weeds, Brad yelled, not stopping his frantic work. Table 3, single diner. Ordered only mineral water and requested the full tasting menu, Pierre said. Brad D., turning slowly to look at Pierre with growing understanding and dread in his eyes. He dropped a fork deliberately to see how fast we would replace it without being asked, Pierre added. It's the Michelin inspector. The one they call the Reaper, because he's ended so many careers. The kitchen went dead silent instantly, even the exhaust fan seeming to quiet down in the sudden tension. A Michelin star could make a chef's entire career, could transform a good restaurant into a destination. Losing a star, or failing to earn one, could end everything Brad had worked for in his 30 years. Brad's carefully constructed arrogance evaporated instantly, replaced by sheer, shaking, visible panic in every movement. Oh God! Oh God! Okay, I need everything absolutely perfect! Nobody breathe wrong, Brad stammered. Elena, get the scallops. No. Wait, start with the foie gras. No, the amuse-bouche first. He started spinning in literal circles, his movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated like a broken puppet. He grabbed a sauté pan and cranked the burner to maximum heat without thinking, pure panic driving him. I'll make the special duck. The duck à l'orange. It has to be the signature duck. He threw the duck breast into the screaming hot pan before it was properly ready or seasoned. Thick, acrid black smoke billowed up instantly, filling the immediate area with the smell of burning failure. Too hot! Chef, it's burning already, a line cook shouted, pointing at the smoking pan desperately. Shut up! I know exactly what I'm doing. I've made this 1,000 times! Brad screamed back. He flipped the duck breast with shaking hands, revealing meat that was charred black outside, raw inside. He tried to make the orange sauce, but his hands were trembling so badly he knocked over the sugar container. It's ruined! The sauce is completely broken! There's no emulsion! Brad cried, throwing a spoon across the kitchen. We have exactly 10 minutes before the main course is supposed to go out, Pierre warned from the doorway. I can't do it! The pressure! It's too much! I can't think! Brad hyperventilated, clutching his chest. He slumped against the counter, then slid down slowly to the floor, his chef's whites smeared with sauce. The rest of the staff stood frozen like statues, leaderless and terrified, nobody knowing what to do next. The ticket machine buzzed again, a harsh reminder that the inspector was sitting out there waiting patiently. We are going to close. We are completely finished. My career is over, Pierre moaned, holding his head. From the back of the kitchen, a sound cut through the panic like a knife through silk. Snap. It was the sound of rubber gloves being pulled off and dropped into the dish pit water. Grace Winters walked out of her corner slowly, deliberately, every step measured and purposeful now. She untied her stained plastic apron and let it fall to the floor without ceremony or hesitation. Underneath, she wore a pristine white chef's coat that she had brought from home this morning. It was her original coat from her restaurant, carefully preserved, the name Grace embroidered in gold thread. She didn't look like a grandmother anymore, like someone's tired, defeated, invisible dishwasher. She looked like a general preparing for the most important battle of a long and decorated military career. She walked past the cowering Brad without even glancing down, her focus entirely on the work ahead. She stepped up to the pass, picked up a clean side towel, and slapped it on the counter hard. The sound was like a gunshot, sharp and commanding, cutting through the chaos and freezing everyone in place. Elena, Grace said, her voice clear and commanding, carrying the authority of decades of kitchen leadership. Yes, chef! Elena responded instinctively, straightening up immediately, her body remembering the night lessons. Fire on table 3 immediately. We are not serving the duck. It's beyond salvation, Grace announced firmly. What are we serving instead, chef? Ellen asked, her eyes wide but trusting completely. Grace looked at the ingredients scattered across the stainless steel counter, her mind working at incredible speed. We are serving the truth, Grace said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. You can't. You're just the dishwasher, Brad mumbled weakly from his position on the floor. Stay down, boy. Class is in session, and you're about to learn something valuable, Grace said coldly. She moved to the stove, with the confidence of someone who had commanded kitchens when Brad was still in diapers. Her movements were a symphony of efficiency, no wasted motion, every gesture purposeful and economical and precise. Elena, get me the sea bass from the walk-in. Line cooks, clear your stations immediately, she ordered. The staff obeyed her instantly without question or hesitation. True authority was energy, not a title or position. Grace grabbed a pan, but she didn't use Brad's panicked high heat that had destroyed the duck. She used gentle, consistent flame, the kind that builds flavor slowly rather than destroying it with aggression. She seasoned the fish not by measurement or recipe, but by feel, by instinct honed over 40 years. "We need a sauce," Grace murmured to herself, her eyes scanning the station like a chess master planning moves. She saw the vegetable scraps Brad had thrown away earlier. Fennel stalks, carrot tops, shrimp shells. "Waste nothing," she said, gathering them quickly and throwing them into a small pot with white wine. She added saffron threads she found in the spice station, reducing the liquid with practiced timing and precision. She mounted the sauce with cold butter until it shone like liquid gold, the aroma suddenly filling the kitchen. The scent was rich, complex, comforting, the smell of real food made with knowledge and respect and love. Brad sniffed the air from his position on the floor, pulling himself up to his knees in confusion. "That smell," he whispered, his professional training overriding his shock for a moment. "That's classic French technique. That's Escoffier-level technique. How are you?" Grace plated the fish with Elena's perfectly cut chives, the ones Brad had thrown on the floor weeks ago. It was simple, elegant, utterly lacking in pretension, focused entirely on the quality of the ingredients themselves. "Service!" Grace called out clearly, placing the plate in the window with a confidence that brooked no argument. Pierre stared at the plate as if it were a religious artifact, his mouth slightly open. Who cooked this?" Pierre asked, looking between Grace and the collapsed Brad. "The kitchen did," Grace said simply, not claiming individual credit. "Take it to table 3 now. Move." Pierre grabbed the plate carefully and ran out to the dining room like a man carrying something infinitely precious. The kitchen waited, in breathless, absolute silence, every person daring to breathe or move. 5 minutes passed like 5 hours, the only sound the hum of the exhaust fans overhead. Then 10 minutes passed, and the tension became almost unbearable for everyone standing there waiting. Brad had stood up slowly, looking small and defeated in the corner, his career crumbling before his eyes. The swinging doors opened suddenly, and everyone jumped at the sound. But it wasn't Pierre returning with feedback or instructions or disaster. It was a man in a gray suit, the diner from table 3, the inspector himself. He walked straight into the kitchen, completely ignoring health code protocols, his face unreadable and severe. He stopped in the exact center of the kitchen and looked around at everyone with penetrating eyes. "Who made the bouillabaisse reduction on the sea bass?" he asked softly, his French accent unmistakable. Brad opened his mouth to lie, to take credit, but no sound came out at all. The inspector's sharp eyes landed on Grace, and he stared at her face intently for several long seconds. Then his gaze dropped to her chef's coat, to the small gold pin she had attached to her collar. It was one of her James Beard medals, the one from 2006, her first and most precious award. The inspector's eyes widened dramatically in genuine shock and recognition of something impossible. "My God," the inspector whispered, taking a step closer to her as if seeing a ghost. "Grace Winters? Is that really you?" "Hello, Charles," Grace said calmly, wiping her hands on her apron without any pretense or drama. "I thought you were dead. Everyone thought you were dead. You disappeared," Charles said, genuinely shaken. "I was merely resting, Charles." "Taking some time away from the spotlight," Grace replied, a twinkle in her eye. "That sauce," Charles said, closing his eyes and touching his chest as if the memory physically moved him. "It tasted like 1985. It tasted like Paris in springtime. It was absolutely magnificent work. Thank you, Charles. That means a great deal coming from you. Grace nodded with genuine respect. But why are you here, in this place? He asked, looking around at the commercial kitchen and then at Brad. I needed a job after personal circumstances changed, and they needed a lesson in humility, Grace said simply. She looked at Brad, who was now pale as raw fish, understanding dawning on his horrified face. You realized who she was? Charles asked Brad directly, his tone making it clear what he thought of the answer. I didn't. Brad stammered, unable to form a complete sentence under that withering gaze. He didn't, Grace interrupted, saving Brad from further embarrassment with unexpected mercy. He was too busy looking in the mirror to see what was actually in front of him. The owner of Le Grand Palais, Monsieur Rousseau, arrived 20 minutes later in a panic. He had been called by Pierre with the news. Grace Winters, the legendary Grace Winters, was in his kitchen. He rushed in panting and sweating. His expensive suit rumpled and saw the scene before him in shock. The Michelin inspector was shaking Grace's hand warmly, speaking rapid French, smiling genuinely for the first time anyone had seen. Brad was standing by the garbage cans looking like a lost child who'd been abandoned at the mall. Madam Winters, I had absolutely no idea. Why didn't you tell me when you applied? The owner cried. Would you have hired a 62-year-old widow with a 3-year gap on her resume as your head chef? Grace asked. Monsieur Rousseau fell silent, knowing with certainty that the honest answer was absolutely no, he would not have. What happens now? What do you want? The owner asked nervously, knowing his entire business hung on this moment. Grace looked around the kitchen at the terrified line cooks, at Elena standing tall and proud in her position. This is actually a good team here, Grace said, thoughtfully, considering each person individually. They just need a leader who teaches rather than terrorizes, who builds rather than destroys. You're hired. Name your price. Whatever you want, it's yours, the owner said instantly without hesitation. Double my current salary, full health insurance, and a budget for staff development and training, Grace demanded. Done. Absolutely done. Brad, you're fired. Get out of my restaurant immediately, the owner shouted without mercy. Brad flinched visibly, tears welling in his eyes as the reality hit him. His career was completely over. Wait, Grace said, raising one hand calmly, stopping the owner mid-sentence. Everyone looked at her in complete surprise, especially Brad, who couldn't believe what he was hearing. He has talent, Grace said, looking at Brad erectly with an expression that was stern but not cruel. But he has no discipline, no humility, and no understanding of what this profession actually requires. She walked over to Brad slowly and stood directly in front of him, meeting his eyes without flinching. You can stay, Brad, she said clearly, and Brad's face lit up with desperate hope. Thank you! Thank you so much, Grace. I'll do anything, Brad blubbered, tears running down his face. But not as head chef, she corrected firmly, and the hope died in his eyes immediately. She pointed deliberately to the dish pit, still piled high with dirty pans from the service. You start there. Tonight. Right now. Brad looked at the sink, then at Grace's steel gaze, then at Charles and the owner, watching this judgment. And tomorrow morning at 6, Grace added, her voice leaving no room for negotiation or discussion. You will report to Station 1, the vegetable prep station, and you will peel potatoes for family meal. You will learn this kitchen from the ground up, exactly the way I learned my first kitchen in 1982. You will learn respect, discipline, and humility, or you will leave. Do you accept these terms? Brad swallowed his considerable pride, looking at the inspector who was watching with academic interest. Yes, chef, Brad whispered, his voice broken but sincere for perhaps the first time in years. Thank you, chef, I accept. He took off his white chef's coat slowly and walked to the sink like a man walking to his execution. He picked up the sponge Grace had used for 6 months, the same one he'd mocked her for using. Grace turned to Elena, who was watching all of this with wide eyes and suppressed joy. "Elena, take off that prep coat and put on A chef's whites," Grace ordered clearly. "Me? You want me to be?" Elena gasped, her hand going to her mouth in shock. "You are my sous chef now, effective immediately. We have a menu to completely rewrite by Monday." Elena put on the white jacket with shaking hands. It was slightly big on her small frame, but she grew into it. Grace clapped her hands twice, the sound sharp and commanding, snapping everyone back to attention. "All right, everyone, we still have dessert service to complete. This kitchen doesn't stop. Move!" The kitchen exploded back into action immediately, but this time the energy was completely different. It wasn't chaotic panic and fear anymore. It was precise, respectful, focused, a team working together. 6 months passed in what felt like both an eternity and an instant for everyone at Le Grand Palais. The sign outside the restaurant had a new addition that drew crowds every single night: 2 Michelin stars. The dining room was booked solid for 3 months in advance, with a waiting list growing longer daily. Inside the kitchen, the atmosphere was focused and joyful in equal measure, productive but not destructive. Elena stood at the pass calling orders confidently, her voice strong and clear, respected by everyone. Ordering 2 lamb, 1 risotto, fire table 6. "Brad, how are those vegetables coming?" "2 minutes, chef. Glazing them with butter now," Brad shouted back from his station, focused and sweating honest sweat. He wasn't the boss anymore, wasn't the star, but he was a better cook than he'd ever been before. He had learned patience, had learned to listen, had learned that cruelty and volume weren't the same as skill. Grace walked through the line slowly, tasting sauces, adjusting heat, correcting seasoning with gentle guidance. She wore her chef's whites with 3 small gold pins on the collar, her 3 James Beard medals. But on her feet, she wore comfortable sneakers, instead of the traditional kitchen clogs, concession to age and wisdom. She stopped by Brad's station and picked up a carrot from his mise en place with her scarred fingers. She bit into it carefully. It was perfectly cooked, sweet and tender with just the right amount of resistance. "Good job, Brad," she said quietly, and shimmin it sincerely. Brad looked up from his work, a genuine smile crossing his face, no arrogance or performance in it. "Thank you, chef," he said with real respect, the kind that came from understanding rather than fear. Grace walked to the back door for a breath of fresh air, stepping into the alley behind the kitchen. The alley was still dirty, still smelled like garbage from the dumpsters, but the evening air was cool and welcome. She took out one of her James Beard medals from her pocket, the one she didn't wear on her coat. She polished it with her thumb, the gold catching the light from the kitchen door still propped open. "We did it, honey," she whispered to her late husband David, looking up at the darkening sky. "We got back up. We taught them. We fed people with love again." She put the medal back in her pocket carefully and turned toward the kitchen, toward her purpose. The noise of the service was music to her ears after so many months of silence and humiliation. The clatter of pans, the sizzle of oil, the laughter of staff who respected each other, who learned together. She walked back inside, letting the door close behind her, and clapped her hands twice for attention. "Order up! Pick up on table 4! Let's go, people! We have hungry souls to feed!" She wasn't just a legend anymore, wasn't just a memory or a name in old magazine articles. She was a working chef again, doing the job she loved more than anything except the man she'd lost. And that, she thought as she picked up a clean spoon to taste a sauce, was all she'd ever wanted to be. The camera would zoom in on her hands, wrinkled, scarred, spotted with age, but absolutely strong and sure. Plating a dish that looked like edible art, like something that could make you cry from beauty. Do you think Grace was right to give Braid a second chance and teach him? Or should she have fired him completely for how he treated her and the other staff? Have you ever had to hide your true abilities just to survive? Share your story in the comments below so we can learn from each other. If you loved this kitchen nightmare that turned into a dream come true, please like and subscribe. We bring you more delicious stories of justice, redemption, and the truth that respect matters more than ego. See you in the next story.